I've played around with a lot of different mediums, but clay's just more exciting to me.
Meet Oscar Yaquian, a potter who loves to create monster-themed pottery.
It seems like people really connected with them, so it just became part of what I do.
In this episode, you will learn why Oscar uses a wide variety of techniques and how this actually elevates his own pottery.
I get bored very quickly, right? So I think you have to use the technique that's best for what you're trying to accomplish.
In this episode, Oscar also talks about why you need to get the form down before you start adding any other details to the pottery.
If you get into all those little details before you actually have the form laid out, I think you're just going to run into other problems.
Oscar also gives some excellent advice on what works well for him to help promote his art on social media.
I'm sitting there, I'm getting all these notifications and all these, likes and follow, and I was like, what's going on?
Oscar finally ends the interview by giving some excellent advice on how you can find your own unique voice with your pottery.
I think you really need to enjoy what you're doing.
Oscar, welcome to Shape Your Pottery and share with me, what is something you believe potters should be doing to have success in pottery?
Hey, Nick, thanks for having me. Well, I think the first thing that you need to do to have success in pottery is just actively be making work, right? You have to do work that you're excited about. You have to love what you're doing, and you just have to constantly be creating. You need to have your own style. I think it's important to establish your own style.
Absolutely love it. And we're going to talk more about style later. But for now, tell me a story how you got started making pottery.
Well, before I took pottery classes, I started sculpting when I was a young kid. I was about 5 years old when I got introduced to clay. My cousin came to visit, and he actually threw it at my face, and it just missed me, landed on the door, picked it up. It was actually plasticine at that time. So I was just always obsessed with the material. I was always making myself little characters or little toys. And that was just part of my childhood throughout. So it was something I was always doing. I didn't really get started with ceramics until I was in high school. So I took my first class when I was about 15 years old. And it was a really exciting material for me because it gave me like a finished product that I could actually hold. And I didn't feel like it was going to fall apart after it's been fired, of course, right? So past any of the frustrations with the materials, it was kind of an exciting, medium for me because I had that struggle with plasticine and playing with other clays like primo clays. I just felt like it wasn't anything really permanent or something that you could actually use functionally. So yeah, I took my first class in high school, and I've been doing it ever since, basically.
Absolutely love it. So you contribute growth as an artist to taking pottery classes. Tell me more about this.
Well, I don't know if that's all I contributed to. I think, like I said, that was one of the first mediums that I felt like it gives me like a finished piece and where it was a little more exciting working with surfaces and all that. But I've been sculpting for a long time. I think before being a potter, I consider myself a sculptor. So yeah, I think ceramics just became part of what I do. I think it just kind of changed the way that I think about making art.
Tell me more about that, how ceramics change the way you're thinking about art.
I guess what you could do with it, and the colors. I've played around with a lot of different mediums, but clay's just more exciting to me. Ceramics in particular because of the surfaces that you can get and just how many things you can do with the medium. There's so many different techniques that you never get bored with it. So I think that's what I think is more exciting about this particular medium versus, other forms of sculpture that I've worked with. I also like working with resins and metal and a lot of other materials as well, or incorporating them at least. But ceramics, I like what you could do with the surfaces more in particular.
Absolutely agree. I love that. So now, can you tell me what is something that you have learned from taking a pottery class that helped you with your own pottery?
I mean, I've taken many different classes. So, I think everything that I've learned is from classes that I've taken. I tend to work with a variety of techniques. Like I use hand building was my first. I hated wheel throwing for years, but I think just taking ceramics classes, I had a lot of different teachers. I took, I went to community college for a while. So even though I started in high school, I pretty much had the same teacher throughout the whole time I was there, about 3 years that I took ceramics. But in college, I took as many teachers as I can take just so I could learn different techniques from them. So I primarily stuck with hand building since, again, coming from a sculptural background, that was a little bit easier for me. But I've had semesters where I've just stuck with wheel throwing, just to really nail that technique down, or mold making or whatever that might be. I tend to get bored and kind of shift a lot, in the way that I work. So it's a lot of years of taking classes. So it's hard to narrow it down to one specific thing that I've learned, but I would say a lot of everything that I've learned about ceramics has been through taking classes or work that I've done.
We love that. Shaping Nation, the more you take classes and the more you learn, the better off your pottery is going to be because you can have more knowledge about everything going on.
Well, going back to that previous question, though, like I mentioned also, is taking different professors so you can approach it in different ways. I think that's what's helped out a lot. Not just learning one technique or one way of working. I think with ceramics, you have to find your own way of working. So that's the advantage of taking classes and really just trying to go with as many different teachers as you can, because you're going to learn something from everyone, right? Even the people that are in your classes, you're going to learn from them, just from that community in general.
Absolutely, Grin. I love that. Real quick, before we continue with the interview, I created a newsletter that dives deeper into the techniques of the potters I interview. If you want to dive deep and learn new techniques about pottery, click this link in the description or click this link here in one of these corners to join the newsletter. Hope to see you guys in there, and let's continue the interview. So let's talk about your pottery. Tell me the story, how you started making your monster pottery that you make today.
Well, I've always been into making monsters, just in general. That tends to be like the movies that I watch. I watch a lot of sci-fi movies, So that since I was a kid, I was always sculpting and making little monsters, based on characters from TV or from a movie or whatever that might be. So I didn't really, I've always kind of done that with sculptural pieces, but I didn't really start doing that with the mugs until maybe about a year and a half ago. And it was just trying something different. One day I was just like, hey, let's try this out. I was really happy with how it turned out. I hadn't been making art, at least ceramics, in a while. So I decided to try it out. Let's put a mouth on this figure. And I like sculpting eyes and teeth. So that just became like, oh, hey, this looks pretty cool. Let me just see how I could evolve this. And I just played around with different techniques for making the mugs. But yeah, it was about a year and a half ago. That was the first time I made this style. Maybe a long time ago I played around with the idea, but I didn't really make too many of them, maybe just a couple here and there. But I just really like the style. It seems like people really connected with them. So it just became part of what I do and what's helped me get growth like on social media. And people, I don't know, for some reason people really connect with them and I enjoy making them.
What were you feeling when you knew that you could continue going with this style of work?
It felt good. I mean, like I said, it was something I enjoyed making that was sellable, that people connect with. So it felt good. I mean, I thought that it started to give me a body of work that I feel like I enjoyed making more.
So you mentioned earlier that you just decided to try out the monster themed pottery. What were you making before and how has your pottery evolved into what you make today?
Well, when I was younger, I made a lot of monsters. I did a lot of figurative work too. I've gone, like I said, I've gone through stages where I've tried to make more realistic figurative work. The monsters was, like I said, something I'd always play around with as a kid, but I didn't really start making them again as an adult until around the time COVID hit. I had a lot of time at home with my kid and I was like his little personal toy maker during that time. So I was making him these little magnet figures that where you can take them apart. I don't know if you've seen that in any of the reels that I've posted, but I was making little figures with detachable parts like eyeballs and all that. So it just started as something that I was doing for him, just to entertain him. We were bored at home for several months. And then I really wasn't doing a whole lot of ceramics for a couple of years there. I was just mainly playing around with resin and working with oil-based and wax-based materials and polymer clay. But then my wife was like, you need to start getting out there and doing shows again. And she actually just went and signed me up for some art shows. And at that time I was like, I don't know what to do. So then I was like, let's just do what I've been doing with my kid and incorporate those things into ceramic. So that's what got me started with the monster mugs. It was this kind of like fun thing that I was doing with my kid. I wasn't really thinking about it too much. And it just kind of translated into what I'm doing right now.
Absolutely love that. So something I love that you do is you combine a wide variety of techniques. Can you tell me why you do this?
Why I do that? Well, again, it goes back to I get bored very quickly, right? So I think you have to use the technique that's best for what you're trying to accomplish, right? So if a slab works better, or if a wheel thrown form works better, or if you're repeating a form a lot, then you should do slip casting. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, but if you know the techniques, why not use them, right? So yeah, if you want to get into specifics about, each one. I can talk about that as well. But yeah, it's just using what works best for what you're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely love that. Shaping Nation, you don't always have to stick with the same technique, and you can use other techniques for what you're trying to accomplish in that moment. I love that.
Well,
so can you
to add a
walk
little
me?
bit more about that too, it goes back to what I was telling you with taking classes, right? Where I would dedicate specific semesters to like, this is for hand building, slab work, coil work, or I would take semesters where I would try to really get good at the wheel. I worked at Shimpo Ceramics for a little bit, and at that time I didn't do a lot of wheel throwing. So I just decided like I really need to get good with wheel throwing. So I dedicated almost a semester or a year to just doing more functional work. So I think you have to use them all, right? And that actually makes you a better sculptor in ceramics. I think if you know the basics, if you know how to work as a potter, I think that makes you a better sculptor in general, just when you're in the medium of ceramics.
So you mentioned that you felt like you needed to learn how to throw on the wheel. Tell me more about that.
Well, like I said, this was years ago. I mean, this was maybe about, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. But since I was working for Shimpo for a pottery company, I felt like, hey, I need to get good at wheel throwing. So I just dedicated some time to that. But it's actually, it's helped me out a lot with sculptural work. So for example, if I do a large head, my technique before that was to roll coils or slab work that would take a long time to just build up that form. But with wheel throwing, you can just throw a tall cylinder and alter it, right? So it just makes it a lot faster and more efficient for the way that you're building. So again, that goes back to what you're trying to accomplish and, using the technique that's best for that. So in a lot of cases too, I'll use a combination of forms. So if you look at pieces like the polar bear sculpture that I have, or some of the Yetis that I've made, that combines slab work with wheel thrown forms, coils. I just use every technique for getting to that point, right?
Love that. And I definitely agree with that method so much. So now, can you walk me through the steps you take when creating one of your monster mugs?
I start off with a very basic form. I have a few different styles and different techniques for getting there too. But what I'll typically do is I'll start with like a base form, right, with no details. I'll open up the mouth just by punching it, like holding it from the inside so you get some back pressure in there. And I use a variety of tools to open up the eyeballs to create little sockets. I use the mini potter's wheel just to make the eyeballs, slab work, coils, everything goes into that. It really depends on how complicated I want to make it. So I have different levels of complexity with them. Right now I also wanted to get into like creating for some of the smaller ones that I'm repeating a lot. This is the first one. Like if you look at someone like this little guy right here, that's the first one that I've made where I'm actually like slip casting the form. But again, it goes back to like just starting with a base form and then going into all the little details from there. I don't do any of the details until I have the exact shape that I want. I think that's the biggest mistake you can make with sculpting in general.
Tell me more about that. Why is it a mistake for that?
To get into little details? Well, I think that you need to be happy with the form first. So I think if you, any sculpture class, that's what they'll teach you. Don't start laying into little details, because if you decide that something is off, and for example, like where you place the mouth or the eye sockets and all that, if that's off, then your whole form is going to look, a little wonky, right? So like if the eye sockets are not leveled. So what I always do is I just have a lot of patience. That's the biggest mistake I see beginners do too, like with ceramics, is they'll start getting into that. That's the part we want to do, right? You want to get into all the little details. You want to put an eyeball, a nose, a mouth. And if you get into all those little details before you actually have the form laid out, I think you're just going to run into other problems. And then you have to redo all that work that you already did to correct it. And it gets a little frustrating. So, and that was one of my biggest mistakes when I was first sculpting or working with ceramics.
Absolutely love that. Shaping Nation, be patient, focus on the form so that you can have an easier time sculpting or making everything else easier later. I love that. So let's talk about the business side of pottery. You just very recently became a full-time potter. Tell me about the moment when you decided to become a full-time potter.
It was a huge decision. I decided to quit my job in January. So it's something that I started thinking about last year. I had a lot of activity on social media. I was selling work consistently, and I had a pretty good job. I mean, my job was, I was managing the art studios at Oakton College, and it was a good, stable job. with good benefits. And I was just burning out last year. I was trying to balance a lot. I have a full-time job, 2 young kids. I have a 7-year-old and a 2-year-old. And then I was coming home. I had a long commute. So between picking up my daughter and getting here, it was taking about an hour. So that's, an hour and a half of my day just driving. Then I would get home, spend a little time with my kids and my wife. And then by 8:30, 9 o'clock, I wanted to run down and make some artwork. And I wasn't keeping up with the requests. So at some point, I was staying up till like 2 a.m. some nights, just incredibly tired the next morning. And I just decided, all right, I can't keep doing this forever, right? If I'm getting 5-6 hours of sleep. And the thing I was really excited about was just going to the studio and making some artwork. So it was a huge decision, but my wife and I talked about it. She was more positive about it than I was. She was very supportive and she was encouraging me to do it. I try to go part-time with my job first. So aside from managing the ceramic studio, I was also managing drawing and painting and 2D, 3D. So I try to see if I can get a part-time position just in ceramics, but that wasn't panning out. I think the request was out there, but it really wasn't moving. So I just had to make a decision, what I want to focus my time and energy on. And I just felt good about, hey, going all in with sculpting and my art. And as I said, I had a little momentum at the time and felt pretty good about it. And I was pretty anxious about it at first. I think I wasn't, like I said, I had a good job. So it was like, but as soon as I did it, as soon as I actually went through with, I actually felt relieved. And I actually, now I've been part-time. I've been helping out. I really just had my first full-time week last week with sculpting because I had been working twice a week until they found a replacement for my position. But somebody's in place now. And yeah, I actually feel real good about it. Honestly, like I'm getting more rest, waking up in the morning, kind of excited to get to work. So yeah, I think it was a really good decision. And so right now I just have the challenge of having to make it work out or continue to have it work for me like it has in the last year and a half or so.
Absolutely love to hear it. So what would you say has helped you most being able to sell your pottery so far on your journey?
Well, right now, what's really working is social media. Between Instagram and TikTok, I've gained a pretty good amount of followers. So that's what's been driving the sales at this point. But now that I'm full-time, I know that I have to do a little more than that. So my plan right now is to just try to get into as many art shows as possible. This year, I'm going a little slow because I know I don't have the inventory. I don't have a lot of art pieces right now. So I just need to create. So this year is mainly going to be dedicated to just making. And then next year, I'm going to be looking into signing up for more shows, creating more online content, all that stuff. But I think it's going to be important to just put things in a lot of different places.
So you mentioned how you use social media. How do you create the content to promote your own art?
Well, I think people like seeing process, right? They like seeing what goes into making the work. And I think what motivated me at first is I would see a lot of videos where I would see these really cool sculpted pieces, but they were 3D printed, which, I think that's a whole nother skill set itself. But it just kind of motivated me to show my process because I'm like, all right, there's a lot of work that goes into this. And that's not to say there isn't a lot of work that goes into people who 3D print their art too, but it's a different form, right? So I think I just wanted to show what I do and how much actually goes into that. So that's why I started making a lot of process videos. And I think those are the ones that get more activity. And that's just that's translated into selling my art just through the exposure of those videos. I had the first viral video. It was early last year, like early January. And I was sitting at a restaurant with my wife. I had no idea I even had a viral video at the time. And it was through TikTok, actually. I was sitting at a restaurant and we're having dinner. And all of a sudden, I'm getting I had an Etsy page at that time that a friend helped me make. But I was just sitting there and I'm getting a bunch of notifications. And I was like, what the heck is this? So I had no idea. And I hadn't logged into TikTok. The only reason I created a TikTok account was because one of the student employees that worked with me, she told me that people her age don't go on Instagram. I'm like, what do you guys use? She was like, TikTok. So I'm like, I guess I'll start putting my stuff there, right? So then I'm sitting there, I'm getting all these notifications and all these, likes and I was like, what's going on? So I logged in and I saw that I had a video going viral. And then from then, it's just been constant activity from that. And, I've continued to create content, but that's what's been driving it now and what's helped me get to where I'm at right now.
How long were you making content for until that one post went viral?
I mean, I had the account for several years. I wasn't actively using it as much. It really just started with a video that I incorporated claymation with. I think it was a process video, like the ones I'm making now, right? But I was goofing around, really. Claymation's something that I liked doing as a kid. When I was in high school, my mom had this old camera. Goofing around one night, and I was like, let's just add a little claymation to this. And then it just kind of opened that back up. I hadn't played with claymation in like forever. And it's something I wanted to go into, animation specifically, but I decided to go for fine art. And I was like, oh, cool. Like this is something I also enjoy doing. I like making videos and I like doing claymation and I found a way to connect it with ceramics.
Love that. Now, what advice would you give to someone looking to start selling their own pottery?
Well, first of all, it would depend on the level that you're at, right? So like for a beginner, I wouldn't recommend it, right? I think you need to do it for a few years. Ceramics takes a long time to really master. I mean, aside from just learning to work with the material, you really have to learn all the techniques, right? So you need to know how to make the work. And it takes a long time to develop that. So my advice would be don't start trying to sell your work too early. Try to master the techniques that are required for what you're trying to create. And then if you are trying to sell your art, then try to find the right venue for what you're doing, right? Talk to people who do work similar in style. But the most important thing is just putting your work out there. So once you feel like you're ready, like you've got something developed that you want to put out into the world, is just getting it out there, right? So through whatever that way that is, if you're applying for gallery shows, or if you're applying for art fairs, or if you're just doing stuff online, it's just really about showing people what you're doing, right? I think that's the most important thing.
We love that. Shaping Nation, the most important thing is to make the best possible pottery you can. And then once you feel like that is being the best possible pottery you can, then start showing it to other people to maybe start selling it. I love that.
So it doesn't have to be perfect either. I think it's always like an evolving thing, but I think it's just important to just be patient to get to that stage, right?
Absolutely agree. So let's talk about discovering your voice. Can you tell me about the moment when you knew you were heading in the right direction with your pottery?
Like I go through stages. So I feel I'll circle that back to what I mentioned before about during COVID, just playing around with my kid and making artwork for him, just goofing around, having fun, not thinking too much about it. I think that's when I started to make better decisions about the work that I make, is I wasn't in my head too much. I think that's why, have you seen kids' art tends to be the best, right? Because they're not filtered. They're just throwing stuff out there without really thinking about it too much. And I think when you go to art school, like I went for my BFA and that's what they just jam in you, right? It's like, you have to have this big idea and like, and I think when I freed myself of that, I think that's when I started to make better artwork, right? I just went in and like, if it's a crazy idea, it doesn't have to be serious. I could have fun with it. Just throw it out there. And I would say that's probably a couple of years ago. What I didn't have though, or what I haven't had up to now, is just time. I think that's been the big struggle for me, is just being able to find enough time to actually create the artwork that I want to make, which is what's exciting about now, right? I mean, I just have nothing but time to make art. And obviously, if I'm doing this as a career, I got to think about sellability. But, you have to find a balance between the two, right?
Absolutely agree. So now, you mentioned that getting out of your own head was the hardest thing. What is something you do now to help you get out of your own head?
That's a good question. I mean, like I said, it's just having fun with what you're doing, just enjoying what you're making. I try to work with, like if I have an idea for something, I try to make it simple at first. So if I say like, I like this different style or this different shape and I want to play around with that, then I just try not to overthink it and make it simple at first. And then if I like it, then I go into, all right, what else can I add to this? Or working in a way where you're just making little alterations and little changes and then, go into the next one, right? Because I think what gets me stuck is when I get into long projects where I'm overthinking and I have all these great big ideas and like they don't work out, then you get frustrated and you put it aside. So, but if you make it simpler and then decide, hey, this is cool. I made a smaller version, like a little maquette, and I want this. I want to see how this looks in a larger scale. Then I think that works out the best, right? Then you don't get to a stuck point.
Absolutely agree. I love that. So now earlier you mentioned that it's important to try to find your style. Tell me more about that.
I think just trying to be unique, right? I think it's okay to get motivation or to be inspired by other people's art, but I think you got to find a way to make it your own, right? So like it's really important to just, if you're just going around and just copying another person's art, just making exactly like they make it, then, that gets pretty boring and people are going to be bored looking at your art, right? They're like, oh yeah, that's just a copy of this. But you could incorporate techniques that they use and try to find a way to make it your own.
Absolutely agree. Shaping Nation, you can model other potters, but don't copy them. Take what you love and apply it to your own pottery. I love that. So now,
or just using different elements, right? Putting them together.
Yes,
sorry,
absolutely agree. Now, what advice would you give to someone that is looking to discover their own unique voice with their pottery?
Well, don't get in your head too much, right? Do the work because you love doing it. Don't get into ceramics just because you want to try to make money. I mean, you can find a lot of different ways to make money that are where you're going to have a lot more success than ceramics. But just I think you really need to enjoy what you're doing. You need to be actively making your work. I think that's important, just consistent and active. It doesn't matter how skilled you are. If you're not actively producing, then, and then if you have momentum, roll with it, right? I think that's important too.
Absolutely agree. Oscar, it has been so great chatting with you today. And as we're coming to close here, what is one thing you want to hammer home with my listeners today?
Just keep making and keep enjoying the process. Should have thought about that question a little better. But yeah, just if you love what you're doing, then it's gonna take you places, and just keep moving, right?
Some excellent parting words of advice. Oscar, it's been so great chatting with you today. Where can my listeners go and learn more about you?
Well, for now, I'll be working on getting my own website eventually, but through social media for now, mostly through Instagram. That's where I tend to post the most. And I think you've got the link for that, right?